Welcome to Reading the Bible with Pastor. Today we're on Genesis chapter 29, starting at verse 31. And here we read about the birth of 11 of the 12 sons of Jacob, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son. She called his name Reuben. Reuben means see a son. For she said, "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon, which means heard. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore his name was called Levi, and Levi sounds like the Hebrew word for attached. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah, which sounds like the word for praise. Then she ceased bearing. Leah, in her jealousy for the love that Jacob shows Rachel, desires that these 4 sons she bears would draw Jacob closer to her, so that he would love her over Rachel. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" So here we see that Jacob is right, that the blessing of childbirth comes from God, whereas Rachel was blaming him for her having no children. We'll continue with verse 3. Then she said, "Here's my servant Bilhah. Go into her, that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." The giving of servants for wives is not ever mentioned in the Bible as being a right thing to do. So here, by giving of the servant to Jacob, Rachel is not doing right by God, but God will use this sin and turn it to good by having her children become part of the 12 tribes of Israel. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Dan sounds like the word for judged. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali, which it sounds like the word for wrestling. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad, which means fortune. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher, which sounds like the word for happy. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you would have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." The mandrake here is, in ancient time, was used for medicine and other things. And the idea of selling the time with her husband for the mandrakes shows that maybe Jacob was not spending as much time with his first wife, Leah. We'll continue with verse 16. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar, which means wages. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a 6th son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun, which means honor. Afterward, she bore a daughter, and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her, and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. And Joseph sounds like the word for he may add. We see here the birth of 11 of the 12 sons of Jacob, and we see that some of these births take place in a sinful manner by giving up servants. And we see that God uses the sinful portions of man, the sinful acts of man, and turns them to his goodwill, so that all can learn of his gospel and be saved. We'll pick up next time with Genesis chapter 30, beginning with verse 35. Please subscribe and share this with others.